Namaskar. Today we are all gathered together to mark the Black Day of 19th of January 1990. It's been 31 years and our KP brothers and sisters are still suffering in exile. For last few years we have been commemorating this day together in London, especially with our uh, cultural society, which is KPCS, Kashmiri Pandit Cultural Society, headed by Lakshmi Kaul from London. And we want to take this conversation further, and we want to take this day, which we always discuss about the past where things went wrong and what happened because of which our own uh, citizens of our country are displaced from their own hometown or homes. So for to take this conversation further, I have with me Shri Sushil Pandit ji. I have Brigadier Vijay Sagar ji. I have a historian and author of many books, Harbans in Sambyal ji, and the our very dear friend Lakshmi Kaul ji, who is the senior most member of KPCS, Kashmiri Pandit Cultural Society from here in London. So first of all, welcome everybody. Namaskar. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So I will take this whole conversation. I will keep it very brief because I have been told that Sushil sir has his appointment later on this next hour. So I want to make sure we take the best, make use of this time, this hour, and get most of the information out and discuss this in more detail. But I would also like to start with our Professor Harbans sir, because he's someone who's been reading and writing a lot about modern history of Jammu and Kashmir, and I would like him to touch base a little bit on the history of what happened during that time. Especially, there would be some series of events which would have brought this particular day, which we mark 19th of January. So, Harbans sir, I'll take the podium over to you to give us some introduction, and then I'll take it further to others.
Thank you, Vikrant. Namaskar. I am very clear in my mind that it took a long time to create 19th January 1990. I can go back into history when the first Muslim Sultanate was established, but I will not go that far. I will begin with the modern times and how they impacted and affected our contemporary world. The seeds of 19th January 1990, they lie in the year 1931. That was the first time after Kashmir had been under the rule of the Dogras, a Hindu king. It is very interesting to note that all Kashmiri historians and leaders, they have developed a tendency of transferring all the atrocities that were committed on Kashmiris, Muslims and Pandits by the Afghans, and they transfer it on to the Dogra rule, the Hindu ruler. In other words, absolving their Muslim brothers from Afghanistan. Sir Walter Lawrence, in his book, he has detailed the kind of atrocities which were subjected to upon the Kashmiris, particularly the Pandits, by the Afghan rulers. So much so that even the Shivratri, the Pandits were told not to celebrate on the anointed day, but in summer, simply because there was a myth attached to it that on Shivratri, there is celebrated in summer so that there is no chance of snowfall. But as things would have it, the snow did come even during the summer. That apart, since 1931, the Muslim conference of Jammu and Kashmir that got consolidated. But soon a faction led by Sheikh Abdullah that went its own way just to garner support from the national leaders of the freedom movement. He succeeded in that. So he had that facade of secularism. Now it is said that the Kashmiri Pandits supported Sheikh Abdullah in large number. My answer is that did they have any other choice if they wanted to live there? If they supported, they had to be friendly with a force that was emerging as a power in the valley. And since many of the Kashmiri Pandits had direct connections with the mainland India, they knew the changing winds were about to strike everywhere, including J&K state. So it was a survival instinct, and one should view it as that. After 47, things began to change. They changed. I will not go into the politics of it. I will go into the main trends so that we can have a larger conversation from our friends and we know more about it. I would just give a framework of that after 47, there was a constant clash between the national idea and the Kashmiri sub-nationalism, which was laced heavily with Islamist fundamentalism. So it was a very toxic kind of a cocktail of sub-nationalism plus the fundamentalism that had already started working in 1949. The land reforms, they affected only the Hindus of Jammu and the Hindus of the valley also, most Pandits to be precise. Apart from that, it is said that Sheikh Abdullah worked through his revenue minister, Mirza Afzal Beg. And his philosophy was that the Pandits should not be subjected to violence, but conditions should be created in such a manner that they begin to migrate. I know a number of friends who migrated in the early 50s. Of course, they did well outside, but the fact was that a point came in their life when they decided that it's better to leave rather than live a compromised life with the hardcore Islamists. This was a gradual process. I would like to say, some would contest it, I'm aware, that the regime of Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad and Ghulam Muhammad Sadiq was by and large trying to balance between the regionalism and the nationalism. Now, no state suddenly develops empathy for the national symbols. Travancore did not. It took a long time for Travancore Cochin to accept the national flag, the national anthem, and other nationalist symbols. I, as a Dogra, I can vouch that one of my uncles, even till the period when terrorism was at peak in Punjab, whenever I would go back to Samba, the first question which he would ask me was, how are things in your India? So I don't blame Kashmiris if they spoke or speak. Now, of course, after 70 years also, if the same dialogue is being used, that of course is objectionable. But I have heard it from the old timers and I don't mind that. But this clash between the two ideas of nationalism and regionalism was not just peculiar to Kashmir or J&K. Tamil Nadu, Madras at that time had almost seceded from the country on the simple basis of language. Bengal was also developing the Bengali nationalism, when again the language issue was on the center stage. If there are strong democratic institutions, they can take care of all these dissenting voices. Unfortunately, this did not happen in the state. There were two factors. One was the state leaders, Kashmiri Muslim leaders, they were dishonest, and the government of India was too greedy to grab power over the people there. Both are at fault. The 80s was a decisive period. The beginning of the 80s was a decisive period when Indira Gandhi was bent upon prevailing in the state, and the regional leaders, first Sheikh Abdullah and then Farooq Abdullah, they hit back with the idea of greater autonomy, etc., etc. I would say that that was their survival instinct, survival response. But this is a fact, this is how it happened, and this is how it started snowballing. 1985 is the worst period administratively. The administration had it had abdicated its authority in the state, left for the Pakistani handlers to develop their own cells. Pakistan had tried its best since 1947 to make inroads into the state. It had miserably failed. But now we gave a chance to the Pakistanis with our own incompetence, the complicity and corruption of the regional leaders of Jammu and Kashmir. What began in 1988, I think the first bomb blast took place in 1988 at the Lal Chowk in a minivan. And then after that, it began a regular affair. On 13th of July, the CRPF bus was attacked, 2 soldiers killed. And after that, it continued to snowball, became bigger and bigger. What happened on the night of 19th January is something which is unforgivable. No state, particularly a democratic state ruled by a constitution that guarantees certain rights, in that state, such a night should never have happened. There have been riots, the Nelly riots of Assam, 2,000 killed in a single riot. But the kind of terror which the Pandits were subjected to, that was not just a physical terror, it was a psychological terror. When all through the night, you are made to listen to certain jihadi songs, stories, sloganeering, threats that the Pandits will either be killed or they will have to leave the valley, and their wives and female folk of the families, they will remain in the valley, converted into Islam, and then appropriated by various Muslim males. This is a combination of physical and psychological terror. And the state as a whole, the government of India, failed in protecting the lives, property, home, and the land of the Kashmiri Pandits. I think from this point onwards, I have a better panelist with me to dwell upon this subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your information and insight on the history. I would like to ask Sushil ji to shed some more light on this topic and obviously the Black Day or night of 19th of January. What, in your view, is what was the situation at that time? Sir, you are on mute. Sorry, you need to unmute.
Thank you, Vikrant. I would tend to largely agree with Harbans ji. Kashmir Valley particularly had this fault line between the two communities, which got deepened in 1931, but it existed over the preceding 400-500 years because of the 480 years of continuous Islamic rule. It started in 1339. It was ended by Maharaja Ranjit Singh's forces in 1819. In these 480 years, to start with by sultans and then by Chucks for a brief period and then by Mughals and followed by finally Pathans, whom Sambyal ji has just referred to. They competed with each other in their hatred for the Kafir. And they targeted Kashmir Valley particularly because this was the fountainhead of the civilization that we call India. Our knowledge traditions flowed from there. Our intellectuals, our great masters, our great works and treatises emerged from this region. It attracted scholars and seekers from all over, including Shankaracharya. I won't dwell in detail on this, but it was the profundity of this community and the place that attracted the most severe of assaults in the history, and incessant, relentless assaults, which led to the population dwindling to single-digit proportions by the turn of century. The Sikh Dogra period was a period of great respite, when state was not tormenting its citizens. And none of the citizens. It isn't that Sikh Dogra rule was a non-Muslim rule and therefore Muslims had it. No. Not a single instance of a mosque undone can be cited in history. Even the shrines which were destroyed and usurped were not reclaimed, which I think would have been a legitimate thing to do. But in the interest of stability, peace, and amity, Dogra rulers, to a fault, were in true spirit secular rulers. About 12 years ago, Amar Singh College celebrated its centenary. So can you imagine institutions of higher learning came very early to the valley. And then Maharaja was giving scholarships to deserving students to go out of the state for even further education. Sheikh Abdullah was on state scholarship to Aligarh Muslim University, incidentally. So these details tell you that this period was different. And because Jammu and Kashmir was not part of British India, and British interests were very demanding especially on the Maharaja, who was young in 1930 when he refused to part with long lease, Gilgit Baltistan area on a long lease, or asserted that there is this division between British India and princely India is fictitious. India is one. And a freedom movement has some legitimate reasons. British decided to punish the Maharaja and use Sheikh Abdullah literally as a stooge. The party was formed in Lahore, Jammu Kashmir Muslim Conference. Was not formed in Jammu Kashmir, because Lahore was the center for media and education in North India, and it was part of British India. And 1931 riots were also unleashed by a gentleman called Abdul Rashid, who was brought in by the British resident in Srinagar from Peshawar and Ahmadiyya, who sparked off a mini rebellion of sorts by instigating people against Maharaja, because he was a Hindu Maharaja over Muslim subjects, and that was haram, supposedly haram in Quran for Muslims, for which he was sought to be prosecuted, and violence to stop his prosecution led to rioting on 13th of July 1931, large-scale rioting which spread over weeks and months into rest of the Riyasat. And rest, as they say, is history. I've written about it with a bit of research, and it's available online. But suffice it to say, this was the first organized riot against Hindus and Sikhs in Kashmir Valley. And not just Kashmiri Hindus, the non-native Hindus also, the Khatris of Maharajganj, the Sikhs, were mercilessly targeted. And Muslims, their neighborhood Muslims, were spared. You know, generally a riot is an all-consuming frenzy. But there is a report of a commission which clearly pointed out that Muslim establishments, Muslim shops, Muslim homes were very carefully spared. So this was a communal agenda. The party itself was a communal party, and it was created keeping in mind that a Hindu Dogra Maharaja was ruling over largely Muslim subjects. So to drive that wedge. And in the valley, Hindus were soft targets, predominantly Kashmiri Hindus, because they were also part of Raja's bureaucracy. And since they had taken to learning and teaching, they were useful in the administration and a lot of other such works. All this may sound quite reasonable and quite plausible. What does not add up is what happened post 1947. In the wake of partition, the state that emerged between East and West Pakistan, which we call India, was perhaps one of the strangest anomalies in its behavior towards itself. Jammu and Kashmir's accession to India was delayed, not as popularly believed because Maharaja was dithering, but because Nehru was imposing Sheikh Abdullah on him. Until such time, Nehru would give way on Sheikh Abdullah, on Maharaja. Maharaja was being forced to appoint Sheikh Abdullah as his prime minister and his emissary so that he could deal with government of India, interim government of India. And Maharaja wouldn't. It was humiliating. Till Kashmir was invaded. In fact, it's very interesting. One gentleman, a brigade major in Bannu, Onkar Singh Kalkat, who knew about the impending invasion, as early as 20th of August 1947, when he came across a communication to his boss, I think Brigadier Murray, and there were detailed plans. So British were interested in Jammu and Kashmir moving to Pakistan. And when they realized that Maharaja was not going to be pushed into that, they planned an invasion. And this gentleman, Onkar Singh Kalkat, after great risk to his life and family, managed to reach Delhi, tell the defense minister, the then defense minister Baldev Singh, and the then director military operations PN Thapar, who went on to become India's chief, that an invasion is happening in the next 48 hours. And General Messavi himself has planned it. And these are the meticulous details of how columns will move, how many in each column, and the directions they would take, and how they'll be shepherded by the JCOs and the captains in the Pakistan Regular Army. This information was dismissed. I believe when on 22nd of October an invasion did take place, they sent for Major Kalkat, who was then searching for his family in Chandigarh. But all that drama about Nehru throwing a fit as to why this was not acted upon is a sham, because India refused to act even after the invasion. India refused to act till 27th of October. Only after the Maharaja was forced to swallow his pride, appoint Sheikh Abdullah as an emissary, send him to Delhi with a unilateral, unconditional letter of accession along with his queen. So India had almost, on Nehru's and Sheikh's whim, written off Kashmir to this invasion. And if Sardar Patel hadn't asserted, and this is an interesting interview in Prem Shankar Jha's book, Rival Versions of History, where he interviews General Manekshaw, who was then Lieutenant Colonel Manekshaw and was representing the army headquarters in that meeting. He was eyewitness to this account. How Sardar Patel literally coaxed an instruction out of the Prime Minister for mobilization of Indian Army to defend the Kashmir territories. And the airlift began early morning on 27th of October. Then on itself, Indian states' attitude towards Jammu and Kashmir has been a kind of an example of halal certified politics, for want of better description. You know, we have halal certification for all kinds of things. I think first and foremost is our politics, which seeks to be halal certified, which seeks this approval. At that time, when Constituent Assembly was to be formed from J&K, the great Democrat Nehru was allowed that election to be hijacked. It was a non-election when 73 out of 75 members of the Constituent Assembly are elected unopposed, with all the nominations rejected against them, and the other two are also lackeys. And then before that, in the Constituent Assembly, you allow Article 370 to be bamboozled despite everyone's opposition and objection, with least amount of debate. You realize that the state of India was bending over backwards to accommodate, to please, to appease. For what? To win approval. Gandhi included. He visits Kashmir on 1st of July 1947, a month and a half before the independence. Sheikh is in prison. His wife receives him. She takes him around Srinagar for public meetings. In those public meetings, it is Akbar Jahan, Sheikh's wife, who is standing in for Sheikh as leader of the party, announces publicly that we are keen on acceding to India. And Mahatma Gandhi, when his turn comes to speak, asks her publicly, क्या आपने सब मुसलमानों से पूछ लिया है? Can you imagine? Indian state behaving like this. So, whether it was Mahatma Gandhi, whether it was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and under his pressure, persuasion, or willingly, his cabinet were doing as the Prime Minister pleased. They refused to, in fact, I have it on authority of several senior officers of that time, when Indian Army sought to cut the supply lines and to destroy the command and control structure of that invasion across the border, Nehru refused permission. He said not a bullet should be fired across the borders. So Indian Army was forced to fight the so-called Kabailis, but actually Pakistani regulars in Mufti also, with all the arms and supplies, village by village, district by district, street by street. And then a unilateral ceasefire on 1st of January 1949 to write off almost 40% of Jammu and Kashmir. I won't go into the details of it in terms of how British were complicit in it, how General Auchinleck, General Massavi, even General Butcher, who was the chief of Indian Army, or for that matter, Major Alexander William Brown, who handed over Gilgit-Baltistan to Pakistan on 4th of November, this entire conspiracy, an Indian state, Indian government, a willing accomplice in this. They couldn't be seen doing it or participating in this conspiracy, but with their reluctance to act, it showed that somewhere they were willing to let go. And this is how even Kashmiri Hindu politics was pushed and nudged. We had our own party called Hindu Yuvak Sabha in Jammu and Kashmir, in Srinagar, in Kashmir. So when Nehru visited Kashmir, when Gandhi visited Kashmir, when Hindu delegations met them, they were told in no uncertain terms, you either join Sheikh Abdullah or perish. You have no room for independent politics. And some of these annoyed Kashmiri Hindus rebuked and humiliated Nehru. There are a great amount of record for that. Eventually, when Sheikh Abdullah's secular pretensions were backed up by Nehru, earlier by changing the name of his party to National Conference, and then later by Naya Kashmir kind of resolution and all kinds of grandiose vision kind of plans, under the sway of prevailing left wave progressive movement, yes, a lot of Kashmiri Hindus did join National Conference. In fact, majority, almost half of the steering committee of National Conference comprised Kashmiri Hindus. They documented most of the ideological positions which were progressive. And it is these Kashmiri Hindus who eventually helped India get rid of Sheikh Abdullah when he was on the verge of revolting, when he was seen to be conspiring against national interests. But even at that time, India did not realize under the leadership of Nehru that there is a problem in the ideology. They saw the problem in Sheikh Abdullah, period. So when Sheikh Abdullah was removed, it wasn't his worldview or thinking that was removed. Minus his ambition and everything remained the same. You mustn't forget, Sheikh Abdullah was purged in 1953. 35A came in June 1954 under Bakshi, when Jammu and Kashmir was allowed to redefine its citizens. So which means even minus Sheikh Abdullah, the policy of the state of India, the successive governments in Delhi were bending over backwards to seek a certificate of approval, which I call halal certification, from the Valley Muslims and their politics and their formations. And all that administrative policy regime which was driving us out without overt violence that Harbans ji just referred to was very clear. It wasn't something hush-hush or secretive. There was a 70% rule, 7-0. All state jobs, 70%, all admissions, 70% for Kashmiri Muslims. The other 30% were distributed within Jammu and some crumbs to Ladakh, nothing for Kashmiri Hindus. So my parents' generation in 50s was forced out for their education and occupation. And we bore that brunt. You know, we were told that you will have to, for the sake of India, live literally as hostages to this hostile setup, where Indian constitution did not prevail, where Indian parliament did not prevail, where Indian Supreme Court did not prevail. And in such an anomalous state, can you imagine, this state was brought about by our parliament, our central government. They tied their own hands in giving so-called autonomy to Jammu and Kashmir, which was essentially an Islamic rule under a different guise, and which was bent upon purging and dominating, harassing the non-Muslims of Jammu Kashmir. The only change that began to show up was in the wake of 71 war, when Pakistan was broken up. Sheikh Abdullah, in his winter, realized that the very platform from where he was seeking the plebiscite and giving vent to some kind of disaffection and separatism in Kashmir had broken up, and India prevailed. So there was hardly any option left, that he gave up all that in return for becoming chief minister yet again without election. Earlier he had become prime minister without election. This time Indira Gandhi handed over power on a platter to him, asking Sayyid Mir Qasim to step aside and asking Congress legislature party to acknowledge him as leader. And then on, he consolidated his hostility towards Jamaat-e-Islami, vanished, and they collaborated. Even in that collaboration, he was very careful. You know, he appointed a Devidas Thakur committee, who was his deputy chief minister, the man who was earlier a judge, a very respected judge, to go into the so-called dilutions in Article 370, an extension of various provisions from the center, like Election Commission, Supreme Court, the changes like Sadr Riyasat to Governor and Wazir-e-Azam to Wazir-e-Ala. Devidas Thakur committee went into all that. It recommended that all those changes are good for the state, and Sheikh Abdullah and his government accepted those recommendations. But imagine, subsequently, again, the governments bent over backwards in order to accommodate. So all these changes, you know, like 71 war and Sheikh Abdullah submitting himself. Before that, expulsion or deposition of Sheikh Abdullah. Or for that matter, August 5, complete neutering of 370. They look like flashes in the pan. They look like exceptions. They look like aberrations in the overall flow of events. Most of the time, India, central government, our system is bending over backwards to appease, to win approval, to accommodate, and in the process is willing to sacrifice national interest, sacrifice patriotic citizens, sacrifice future, sacrifice the stability and security in Kashmir. To the extent that even Musharraf formula, which is reflected in the self-rule document of PDP, where you have a borderless state, you have shared sovereignty, you have joint control, you have Sharia in banking, you have currency of Pakistan coexisting with Indian currency. All these harebrained ideas were not only floated, they became a manifesto of a political party, which was funded and raised in 1998 when NDA-1 was ruling. So we have gone through mind-boggling events where Indian state has prostrated. And the biggest of them, which was criminal, was when in 1990, we were hounded out in a genocide. Indian state decided to give an unwritten clemency, did not prosecute people who drove us out. Even today, Yasin Malik or Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani or Mirwais Farooq or Bitta Karate, who are the iconic tormentors and genociders of Kashmir, are treated with kid gloves. They are not called upon to face the consequences which in any other civilized society would have resulted to they hanging by the gallows. I think that is where I would like to sum up. We see with great fanfare Indian state trying to assert itself, but clandestinely restoring the privileges back, whether it is through Domicile Act, whether it is through asking the High Court to review Roshni Act decisions. Can you imagine? Just 2 months back, the governor of Union Territory, Lieutenant Governor, which is ruled by our central government, has requested the High Court to review its decisions on Roshni Act with the rest of the country in complete dark about it. So that is what we are faced with. There is an inimical state, a hostile state across the border who's unleashed jihad on us. And there is our state, which is trying to be in bed with that jihad too. And we, the patriotic citizens, are getting crushed between these two. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sushil ji. No doubt it's very difficult and hard to even imagine what exactly would have gone through in those tough times. It is actually mind-boggling and troublesome for us to understand. I would really like Lakshmi ji to come on and give us some more insight on what she feels and what her experiences are and her understanding on this. Lakshmi ji.
Thank you, Vikrant. Namaste to everyone. The winter of January is always very, very hard for us. Doesn't mean that the rest of the year is any easier. Over the last few days, we've been part of many discussions and discourses where politicians have actually called out and said that it is your duty to remind your kith and kin what happened. With due respect, yes, of course, it is our duty. It is not just duty, it is our life. It is with every breath that we take and we breathe out, we do remember that we are homeless, that we are away from our own roots. Vikrant, I was born. I was born in exile. My family were ousted even before my birth. So I've actually grown up in exile. So my feeling is that of helplessness and of disconnect from my own land, my home, even before my birth. And over the years that I've grown up, I have been vilified for being in that situation rather than, so people like me, who were born outside of Kashmir, who did not grow up in Kashmir, are constantly reminded that tum to nakli Kashmiri ho, tumko to bolna bhi nahi aata, tumko to kuch nahi aata, tumko to wahan ka kuch nahi malum hai. So over the years, one has made an effort to find out, one has made an effort to visit, but you leave with a sense of sadness every time. And I do visit Kashmir quite often, and people, there are people who I meet and I visit, and I keep looking for where my house might have been, my family home might have been. I don't know till this date. I have never been able to locate. So, I mean, one can go into history, and of course, it is very, very important to know your history, because there are important historical markers that pave the way for, or almost give an indication of what is lying ahead, or what has been going on, what is going on currently. So what Harbans and what Sushil is, both of them have talked about, are very, very important in understanding what exactly is happening currently. So I'm not a historian, I'm a political activist. And my background is in human rights. And in the last few years, I've come to learn about a bit more about the genocide of Hindus. And the Kashmiri Hindu genocide remains a glaring one, and without even recognition. One does argue that with the banning of JKLF, we were formally recognized, but I'm yet to see a formal recognition, because a formal recognition of genocide would entail a number of steps of reversal of genocide would have begun, but we have not seen anything like that. And Vikrant and all those listening to this program today, I want you to pay attention to what I'm about to say, because you may think that this is something that the Kashmiri Pandits are crying about, but please try and put yourselves in that position and understand how this applies to all of you, each one of you. So there is a gentleman called Gregory Stanton, who has spelled out the stages of genocide. Now that is another matter that the gentleman has not really focused on or looked at or even acknowledged the Kashmiri Pandit genocide. He has, of course, talked about the genocide of certain other community in Kashmir, because that is the propaganda that is doled out. But without delving into that, let's look at what the classification is. And January, as you know, is also the Jewish Holocaust month. I mean, the Jewish Holocaust, thank God, is at least recognized. So the term Holocaust has been borrowed, if you like, from the Jewish Holocaust. And the Kashmiri Pandit community also marked this very, very difficult month as a Holocaust month. So the first step of genocide is classification. So they start othering us, so it is them and us. There is a gradual process of exclusion on the basis of the differences. So if you are not us, then you are them, and you're somebody heinous, and you should be excluded completely. Then gradually the process also entails symbolization. So number 2 step of genocide um, is symbolization, misappropriation, in our case, conversion, are various. So in the Jewish Holocaust, one would know that the Nazis asked them to wear a yellow symbol, to signify something. So we were asked to leave our faith in we were asked to convert, which has been the biggest: die, convert, or leave. Then the third step is discrimination. So the dominant group actually denies the basic civil rights, and often, and it goes on to even denying citizenship to the minority, communities who are suffering at the hands of this genocidal process. I mean, an example is that 1935, the Nuremberg law stripped the Jews of the German citizenship itself. Now, it would, a lot of communities would relate with what has been happening in India itself or elsewhere around the world. Kashmiri Pandits are nowhere people currently. We are now scrambling and making temporary tenements in different places that we call house or home or whatever we call it. The number 4 step is dehumanization. There are enough examples, and I've heard Sushil talk about it many, many times. He's also written extensively about it. There is a gross mistreatment and an utter stripping of personal dignity. I mean, the Tutsis were referred to as the cockroaches, in the Rwandan genocide. Us, we were given various names by the Islamic jihadists in that genocidal process. And a lot of state processes also have actually dehumanized us, and they continue to do so. The number 5 step is organization. Now, one needs to know that genocides are never one-off. They don't just happen out of nowhere. They are planned. And they are planned for years and years and years, and they're often planned for generations. What are they meant to do? They're always planned to carry out destruction. And it is done by a very, very planned process of training and equipment. Number 6 step is polarization. You see that very actively here, Vikrant. You've been part of many counter protests and marches and protests, talking, highlighting the atrocities and the protests that we have been countering by the propagandists here. So the polarization happens, and propaganda, it begins to be spread by hate groups. And we have many and more here in the UK and even in India. There are many people trying to project, the narrative of Azadi in the context of Kashmir. Number 7 step is preparation. Now, the perpetrators, they always plan genocide, and they plan and use various euphemisms in that process. Number 8 is persecution. Of course, the victims are identified because of their ethnicity or religion. In Kashmir, it is not an economical problem. It is all on the basis of religion that the othering happens and the persecution happen. 1990 is a glaring classic example of just that. Die, convert, or flee, with your women and without your men. We will convert Kashmir into Pakistan. Were shouted out from the mosques. Number 9 step is extermination. A systematic mass campaign of violence is rolled out and inflicted on the communities. The final step is denial of genocide, which is what we are facing currently. Now, there is the official recognition of genocide. So all of these, 9 steps that you have seen will not be reversed, because there isn't even the first one. I mean, there is no recognition. The step minus has not happened in recognizing a genocide, and there is an active systematic denial of genocide, unfortunately, in our case, not just by our perpetrators, but actually by the state itself, that is responsible for protecting us. And you see a lot of online hate campaign and propaganda currently. Now, in that light, what are the Kashmiri Pandits asking for? Why do we keep crying about, the genocide? You will hear terminologies like genocide, the denial of genocide, and the reversal of genocide. And I'm sure Sushilji can talk a little bit more about the reversal of genocide in process. But in my simplistic understanding, over the years of campaigning and fighting for the rights, there are really these things that we are asking for. We want the state government to recognize, to investigate, and to punish our perpetrators and to reverse this genocide. The return and rehabilitation is often thrown in our faces by saying that, ab aap ghar chale jaiye na, Article 370 to hat gaya. Ab aapko, what is preventing you now from going back to your homes? What is preventing us is the safety, the security. What do we go back to? And which brings me to an important point that nobody really talks about and is very, very important in understanding the scale and the expanse of the genocide that has happened. What is the cost of genocide of Kashmiri Pandits? Has anybody ever done a survey to map out the extent of the loss that we have incurred? हमें बोल तो दिया जाता है कि आप जाइए, आप जमीनें खरीदिए, लेकिन मैं अपनी जमीन, जो मेरी जमीन छीन ली, मेरा घर छीन लिया, मैं जाके वो फिर से खरीदूं. I'm asked to rebuy that land at a much higher rate, because obviously cost of land, goes up. Kashmir mein sab kuch kafi महंगा है आज की rate में. People living there have got it very, very easy and comfortable. Sushil ji, in one of his recollection of his personal stories, because he's at least gone and visited that spot with his family to see where his home was. I haven't even managed to find out where it was. That there are shops there, and many other Kashmiri Pandit families, if they go back to a complete scene of shock, because they don't even recognize the place anymore, except for some scramblings of symbols or signages or something, and sometimes a wandering neighbor perhaps that they recognize in the passing, or they recognize you, right? How many temples have been desecrated? How many properties have been usurped? What is the total cost of all of this? And who is going to pay this? One does, wonder that, in the Jewish Holocaust, at least they are able to put a figure somewhere, and they were able to ask Germany to pay that figure, and, an apology was also sought. But in our case, who is going to apologize to us? Who is responsible? And I don't speak as just as a Kashmiri Hindu, but I speak as any minority that has been ousted from their homeland or home and been rendered, rootless. And, you are all in the danger of that situation right now, actively as we speak. Of course, an apology is owed and an acknowledgement is owed. But then what will sheer lip service do for us? Nothing. It has achieved absolutely nothing. Has anybody even mapped the change in demography of the city of temples? Na? Beautiful backdrop that you sit against, Vikrant. The city of temples very soon will not be the city of temples, because Kashmir used to be the land of learning, but it isn't anymore. It is a land of jihad. There is gaslighting actively, there is a whitewashing of facts, there is obviously a lot of lip service that we are tired and fatigued with, and there is sympathy. How does that sympathy come about? On request. We actually have to ask for messages of support from politicians on key days like 19th of January, 26th of October, various other days, कि अच्छा please एक छोटा सा message दे दीजिए record करके, वो अपने living room में देते हैं. And some of our friends will actually say that अरे उन्होंने message तो दिया है, he has been very vocal about it. But I differ. On the floor of parliament, which is the seat of lawmaking and the primary job of lawmakers, and I understand this role very well because I have worked with a parliamentarian. I understand the lawmaking process. That process has not even been initiated in our case. So there is a very, very dire need for a public movement of awakening at this very hour, asking simple questions of their political representatives. Aapne apna kaam kiya. Vikrant, you run a business. If your employees didn't do their job, your business will fall apart. And imagine if our politicians are not fulfilling their primary role of making law and protecting their citizens. What is the country coming to? And what has the country come to? And I'll actually pause there, request anybody else who may want to respond to that or input into that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi ji. It's a very valid point, and I absolutely do agree that this is the time we have to wake up, because like you just very well said, that if we don't act on it, then surely the city of temples would also be changed. The demography is already changing, and many of us kind of can see it but are not doing anything to counter it, or perhaps to even talk about it. I will very briefly like to come back to Sushil ji again, because I know his time is really important, and we are running out of time because he has another appointment. Sushil ji, very quickly, how do you see the current state of affairs? What do you think should be happening to improve it? Or perhaps like Lakshmi ji said, where is the apology, or who's going to apologize and who's going to pay for all the losses? How do you see that? Oh, you need to unmute, please.
Thank you for your question. I don't think that there are people falling over each other to apologize to us for whatever they did. In fact, today they are rationalizing. They are trying to lie and brazenly just concoct and fabricate about those conditions. They have Jagmohan to throw at us. They have the action by our security forces against jihadis to counterpoise our exodus and violence against us. And they are prevaricating. They're actually not even acknowledging that anything happened 30 years ago, much less express regret or apologize. And the state, who we so love and work for, has also abandoned us. We are on our own. But because our state has some pretensions towards democracy, secularism, liberal values, cherished freedoms for its citizens and citizens' rights, I think that gives us a bit of a chink to shame that state into not looking the other way any longer. Somewhere build awareness. These days, this word narrative is thrown about far too much. For the first 20 years after our tragedy, we were horrified to see our tormentors going around like victims across the world, like freedom fighters, like great moral beacons to tell the state of India as to what must be done in Kashmir. So in the last 10, 12 years, we have tried to counter all that by stating truth, nothing but unvarnished, unadulterated truth. I think that job needs to be done with bigger passion and energy. We need to build enormous amount of awareness, and through that awareness, I'm sure in a democratic polity that we have, pressures will come, public pressures will come, pressures of opinion and perceptions will come, and that will set a lot of things right. A lot of reluctant governments do things in order to alleviate that pressure. Indira Gandhi called for elections in 77 after ruling for 2.5 years with an iron fist because she wanted democratic legitimacy. If we are able to convince the world about looking at our genocide, our Holocaust, with some more reasonableness, I'm sure things will change. Recent developments give us hope. Though it's a long battle and we must prepare our subsequent generations for it, we must keep a hawk's eye on the hypocrisy of suggesting that they are doing one thing and in the dark doing just the opposite. I've mentioned a whole lot of things that they have done in the name of even restarting the democratic process. One of the most ridiculous examples here is the DDC elections. When the valley kicks you in your face with less than 3% vote, you rejoice in victory. I just can't for the life of me understand how can you turn an utter rout into a celebration. But we saw that because we are unwilling to accept that we are on thin ice and we are sinking in this swamp of our own making. So we need to keep calling out this falsehood, this hypocrisy, this untruth through our unwavering defiance. As common citizens, we don't have much of a power of authority, of violence, of resources. We are up against mighty states, a state across the border called Pakistan, who's out to exterminate us, and our own state, which I keep saying is trying to win the favor from our tormentors. So we need to fight both these states with defiance, with resoluteness, and with single-minded focus of keeping the light shining on our truth and the shared truth, because brethren in Jammu region today face a similar, God forbid, circumstance that we went through 30 years back through the demographic invasion. There are 500 plus clusters across the country which are already hemorrhaging because of the same hypocrisy. And there is no Article 370 there, incidentally. There is no 35A there. But people have to flee to safer areas. So we need to build a lot of awareness countrywide through facts, through reasoned arguments. And I think that's where we'll find a way out. We have to persevere, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Sushil.
May I be allowed to leave? I'm sorry, I'm running late elsewhere. May I have your permission,
Absolutely.
Thanks for leaving halfway. I would have loved to hear Brigadier Saab also speak. Brigadier Saab, I hope I'll get the recordings of this and I'll go through what you have to say. Thank you so much.
Before the event started, I think I just had said something. I would have liked you to comment on that. Maybe later, if you're in a hurry today.
We certainly will, sir, in the next available opportunity. Thank you so much.
There are strategic aspects to this whole problem which needs to be brought out in a very, very pertinent manner.
I agree, sir. I agree.
Thank you.
Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Sushil sir, for giving us your time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So I'll continue further with Brigadier Vijay Sagar ji. I'm really sorry, sir, we didn't get a chance to come to you, but I would like to ask for your views on this situation, especially like Sushil ji's departing comments were that even the region of Jammu is kind of going through the same phase which the Kashmir was 30 years ago, or maybe even more than that. So what are your views on it? What are your comments?
Well, thank you, Vikrant. Today I realized that even if you're the last speaker, you're not the worst off. In fact, a lot of your load has already been shed. Well, my heart cries out for Kashmiri because I am myself one. And I think on this August panel over here of whatever number of people who are present here, I'm the only one who's a permanent resident of Jammu and Kashmir right now. Though I also went back to Jammu after 42 years of, boarding school life, National Defense Academy, and the army, and etc., all kinds of things. But then, you see, I have tremendous amount of empathy with my Kashmiri brothers, not because I am a citizen of a country where I'm speaking and there's some community which is persecuted. No. I feel I'm part of the same community on a strategic level. I'll tell you how. Unfortunately, this word genocide, I do not know, I may be wrong, but when my service in the military, in the army, well, of course, I wasn't allowed to speak publicly, but nevertheless, we had our voice. We had our discussions at a different level. But I never heard this word genocide, and that surprised me a lot. It kindled me a lot. And I remember very correctly, 2 years back when I was in the open polity of Jammu as a retired veteran from the armed forces, and I was working in a university in Punjab at that time. And that is the time with the leaders like Ankush Sharma, or leaders like Chaudhry Lal Singh, or leaders or even BJP leaders. I used to cry hoarse, please call it a genocide. Please don't call it Pandit's exodus. No, it is not exodus. It is a genocide. I used to feel very, surprised within myself. Pandits are not a marginalized community by any standard since centuries. As we said, if you read Raj Tarangani, this was a seat of learning. If you know what happened in Mahabharata, after the war was over, the last rites had to be conducted. They wanted a Pandit from a learned person from a place which did not participate in Mahabharata, either from Kauravas or Pandavas side. So Kashmir was the place. And when that learned man went there, his turnout wasn't very good. His pagadi wasn't very good. It wasn't very neatly done up. And people made fun of him. And the moment he started speaking, now in the words of one of my uncles, late Prithinath Shalia, he told me, जब उन्होंने बोलना शुरू किया तो एक थू किया ऋग्वेद, दूसरा थू किया यजुर्वेद, meaning to say that man was a very learned person. That seat of learning came from there. And if that be so, how can a community, Lakshmi ma'am is here, ma'am, food for thought, why you all, or rather we all, did not fight it out when it happened? Okay, there were problems before 90. What about after that? What logic do you have to tell the world that you are refugees within your own country, within your own territory? Which classification, which theory of this world even United Nations, anywhere, it tells you you can be a refugee within your own country. Why was it not fought tooth and nail at all levels at that time? And why my problem with my Pandit friends is, I've been telling them openly, I said, you people are the most intelligent, most learned people on this planet Earth. If intellectual wise, you are the best of the people. I even went on to say, how many FIRs in how many police stations in this country? How many PLs, PILs in how many high courts in this country? Why was there not a moment right from 90 onwards, if not before? We'll talk about that also. So those are my feelings. Like Jammu, I'm petrified. Like Lakshmi ma'am said, Jammu is a city of temples. Let me tell you, listen to Professor Hariom. He'll give you exact number of mosques in Jammu which have come up in last 10 years. How many are they? 482. And there used to be 3 mosques at one point in Jammu. And a lot of other things. I mean, we will not talk about that. Today we're talking about Pandits. We'll not talk about Jammu. But Jammu is going to see the same fate again. There's no doubts about it. Now let's get on to the history now. Like all has been given by Mr. Sambyal and even Mr. Pandit, Sushil Pandit. I'm a great fan of Mr. Sushil Pandit. I've heard him many number of times, and you know, and lots of YouTube and all kinds of forums. I've been listening to him. But I would add somewhere here, like he rightly said, there was a 450 odd years of Muslim rule. Lot of desecration took place. Lot of temples were razed to ground. Lot of them, even if forget about temples, they were architectural marvels. They were seat of power. They were removed. And once the Dogra Sikh rule came, no effort was made to sort of resurrect them. And it was said it was secular. I find this article, this argument, that's a bad word for me to use, ridiculous. There was a time when Maharaja Pratap Singh decided, okay, reconvert all these Muslims back to Hindus, because the Hindus converted into Muslims over a period of time. And that is the time, it was our civil society, our bureaucracy in J&K state advised Maharaja Pratap Singh against it. And my Buzurg in Jammu, who are aware of these things, they say, Maharaja Pratap Singh itna kabil Raja nahi tha, isliye wo nahi kar paya. So that was one issue. Secondly, when I talk to the people, they say, why Pandits have moved out? They say, no, we are Hindus. We've been tolerant for centuries. We are peace-loving people. We are non-violent people. Bullshit. You are tolerant, you are peace-loving, you are non-violent. It's only as long as things are okay. When people are attacking me, my mothers are taken to task, my sisters are taken to task. Very well, there'll be no non-violence at all. I have to pick up arms. I tell you, example of my own friend in Srinagar. It happened in his house. It was said that Muslims are coming, attackers are coming. So they bolted the doors of their house on the bank of River Jhelum. And all ladies were told to go on the top floor. And gents said, we will be there at the gate and we'll stop the attackers at the gate. But should they enter, the instruction was, all ladies, please jump into Jhelum. This is what had happened on 11th of January 1990. So what is this nonsense? And then one of the girls said, I will not jump. The mother of a friend of mine, he says, my mother told me, beta, you don't worry. If she doesn't jump, I'll throw her into the thing and then I'll jump. What is this happening here? I mean, this kind of a situation, how do you say that it is non-violence? Because we are Hindus. We are tolerant for the ages. I mean, this is not explainable. There's something wrong somewhere. Now, what is that wrong? We had a discussion with Mr. Sambyal the other day on the same thing. What is wrong is, did the intelligence fail? Wasn't there a government in the state? If Sheikh Abdullah could be arrested in 1953, being a prime minister on whatever charges we all know in that Kashmir conspiracy case, would this conspiracy be unearthed in time? Didn't we have enough sort of indication for all that happening? What was Jagmohan doing as the governor? Didn't he have it? He knew it because he wrote a letter to Rajiv Gandhi which explicitly says he knew the situation on ground. Now, next question again, what we discussed with Sambyal the other day. I'm an army guy. I have served in the United Nations in Gupkar Road 3 years. I've been insurgency grade commander in Srinagar with a whole lot of my friends. My father was a chief engineer there. A whole lot of Kashmiris, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, they are still my friends and very close to me. We meet them very often. So I know the pulse, what exactly was the feeling. So what was happening to them? There is a plan which is made by the civil administration with the local army unit in case there is a riots, the civil disorder, there is a civilian problem, army will be called out gradually. And how army will come and react, that is also given as per the SOP. Like somebody says, no, if army would have called up, there would have been a genocide again and world would have been against us. No, army's response is also successive and gradual. It is as per the SOP. It is with checks and bounds. So why did Jagmohan didn't call? Didn't he know about it? This is rehearsed every year at least twice. So if somebody says that I am in civil administration and I had no knowledge that this kind of arrangement exists, I do not agree with that. I have rehearsed myself. I was there. So that was the second. What was the government doing? And like Mr. Pandit very explicitly told us, the government has always been with them. I'm also saying so. The government always believed in the jihadi mentality. They were trying to appease them. And even now, even after 370, it is the same thing. I said it is a new wine in an old bottle, or old wine in a new bottle, whichever way you want to call it. So that is what exactly is happening. Now, problem is, even now, if I meet Mr. Pandit next, my question would be, and a food for thought for Lakshmi Kaul, please tell me what is the strategy now? How am I to organize in a credible manner to tell the government of India, whosoever is there in the center, listen, this is the wrong thing. Your appeasement policy doesn't work. It is a Ghazwa Hind. It is jihad started by Zia-ul-Haq. It is Operation Tofaq to bleed India by 1,000 cuts. And not only that, conquer India, the whole of it, one way. And it has been happening since centuries. Again, I go back to Kabul. Mama Shakuni, Gandhari, they were Hindus ruling Kandahar. That was part of Indian civilization. The Bahamas are Buddhas, which were fired upon. That is Indian civilization. So that is how it is gradually coming up and up. And it has come till Srinagar. Now it is the turn of Jammu. Jammu is being used as a sandbag against the invasion from Kashmir. There is a strategic perspective with the Hindus of Dogra Hindus of Jammu or Kashmiri Pandits of Muslims. They are not different. Unfortunately, there is some kind of ideological thing which is coming from the other side, from the Islamic Wahhabi side, and they are telling the Muslims in Kashmir that you are unique. You are not even the same Muslim as the Muslims in India. You have nothing in common with Muslims in India. You have nothing in common with Hindu Muslims of Jammu. You have nothing in common with Hindus of Pandits of Kashmir. You are unique. Wherein the fact is, there is only a handful of these who came from Central Asia or Afghanistan or even Turkey for that matter. Few of them, rest all are converts. There are Muslims whose names, surnames are Butts calls even today. Sheikh Abdullah is called. So with that kind of indoctrination, what they are trying to do is, they're trying to move inch by inch. You're blaming China and you say there's a Islamic slicing tactics. This is also Islamic slicing tactics over the ages. Unfortunately, their organization is so strong and so I would say recognized that they're carrying it for centuries. We can't think of a plan even for next 10 years. Why not? Where is the problem? Problem is because we are so badly fragmented. Whether the Hindus of Jammu or even Kashmiri Pandits. Pardon my saying that, Kaul ma'am, but this is a fact. I have come across many guys who don't see eye to eye with each other. How are you going to fight it out? And yes, as you said, the temple of city of temples would soon cease to be city of temples, and we are not waking up to it all. So we have to sort of look at the strategic aspect, get together, and tell the government of India, listen, it is not the different. Don't try don't allow the wedge to be driven between Pandits and Jammu Hindus. Basically, they are one, and they've been one historically. Historically, they've been one, and there's a ample population of even Kashmiri Pandits in Jammu who are brethren with us for ages. Why can't we be together to fight this menace out once for all? And even today also, we are just blaming the government that they are not doing this, they are not doing this. How are we? What plan do we have to convince them? Look, these are the facts. Why don't you recognize? If you feel that you have to face the world in terms of Jammu and Kashmir, that look, Muslims are with us and we have to appease them. But in the bargain, you will be losing. Maybe it is Jammu next, then maybe Punjab next, then maybe Haryana next, and then they say Delhi dur nahi hai. Pakistanis have already started 65 war or 71 war. They should tell the soldiers, okay, breakfast Jaisalmer में होएगा, lunch जोधपुर में होएगा और रात का जुम्मे की नमाज लाल किले में पढ़ी जाएगी. They are openly saying it. अगर उनकी नमाज लाल किले में पढ़ी जाएगी शाम की नमाज, तो हमारी दिवाली भी कंधार में, अगली दिवाली कंधार में मनेगी. So I'm not trying to incite violence. I was told, look, you're showing very strong views. I said, I'm not trying to stoke violence. I know we have never done it last, say, 5,000, 10,000 years. We never had expansionist ideas ever. And we will never have it now also. But this is just a message must go across. Hey, look, world is not the way you look at. And in one of my recent articles, I told them, what is Bhagwan? Where's Bhumi? Where's Gagan? Where's Vayu? Where's Ab? And Nab. That those 5 तत्व उसका भगवान बनता है. अल्लाह भी वही है. A for Ab, L for Lab, Il for Ilal, and A for Ab and A Haran. Again, same 5. There's no difference. The chocolate which you are looking for, whether you're Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai, is the same. It is just the color of the wrapper which is different. And that color of the wrapper has been made in a different factory. But then that factory architecture is also same. That everything is same. So making it a Hindu-Muslim issue and started fighting it and throwing some community out, I feel it is not justifiable at all from any side, from any angle. It cannot be justifiable. But then issue today is, which I think I've spoken quite a lot, issue today is, how are we going to awaken those sleeping guys in Delhi? Yes, they have a plan, they have a strategy. We have to tell them, look, your strategy is incorrect. Please understand and correct it in a manner which is good for everybody. I'm not against Muslims. Let me show you that also. Well, I got plenty of Muslim friends in Srinagar also. Muslims, majority Muslims are good. मैंने Quran Sharif पढ़ी है. And I'm telling you that also teaches you a good thing. It is only a minority who are right wingers, who are extremists. But the only problem with Muslims, my Muslim friends, is I would appeal to them also. Whenever the right wingers are speaking, you majority Muslims who are good, moderates, peace loving, you always remain quiet. That is my only point. Thank you very much.
Sir, I would like to quickly respond to a couple of statements because you did direct them at me, and I wish Sushil was here. With due respect, I think where there are politicians, nahi, sir, with a lot of respect, a lot of regard, we owe the safety and security of our country, our lives to our armed forces, and you, sir, have served a very, very decorated officer, sir. So, I mean, with a lot of respect and humility. The thing is that we were ousted forcibly from our houses. Our brethren, our women were maimed, they were raped, they were looted. So it was not that we left of our own will, unlike what was shared. Sometime back, a few years back, somebody very senior, very, very prominent in the government had actually doled a statement out at me. आपके पुरुष तो बिल्कुल ही नपुंसक रहे हैं, उन्होंने तो आपकी रक्षा नहीं करी, आप तो कुछ नहीं कर पाए. सर, मैंने उनको खाली एक चीज पूछी, मैंने कहा आपने किसी की जान बचाई है कभी? किसी की जान लेने में और किसी की जान बचाने में बहुत अंतर है. There is a big difference. Our whole community was actually saved. Our lives were saved so that we could live and fight another day. You know that statement fairly well. Of course, you know, there were many who lost their lives as well in the process. And there were people who spoke up, have been speaking up 30 years, 31 years, and even beyond that. ऐसा नहीं कि लड़ाई नहीं है, लड़ाई तो चल ही रही है, हम सब युद्ध में ही हैं. We are all fighting this war. We are fighting many battles of our own. Of course, there are challenges of survival. Look at people living in Jagti. Look at people living in the various camps. They are not even worth calling camps. I feel that they are worse off than slums. Nobody looks at them. जब जो जिनको कोड हो जाता था ना, उनको शहर के बाहर पटक देते थे. बेचारे हमारे जो समुदाय के लोग हैं, उनको शहर के बाहर पटक दिया है. Are they so worse off, and are they not even their dignity has been taken off. जो gaslighting आपके और मेरे ऊपर जो दुश्मन ने की है, आज की डेट में unfortunately our tragedy is that we are gaslighting over each other. And I'm so glad that you called out for us being the same. You and I are not any different, and that's why I use the example of the city of temples. And मतलब कितनी आस्था के साथ we go to the temples, and we offer our prayers, and we celebrate festivals together, our daily prayers together. Food is shared, our cuisine is now almost overlapping. When we were ousted, where did we go? We went to Jammu. We came to Jammu. और कहाँ जाते, घर ही तो जाते, मतलब so.
Lakshmi ma'am, you said Jagti and you said slums. I have seen it lower Roopnagar, even worse than Jagti.
Absolutely,
and my
sir.
house is right behind Chambu.
Absolutely. And absolutely, sir. Bilkul, bilkul. And the thing is कि you and I can argue with each other कि इसने वो नहीं किया, उसने वो नहीं किया. Actually, हम सबकी जिम्मेदारी. It's every single one of our responsibility. Again, I'm actually glad that, coming from you, from somebody as senior as you, somebody who's seen it up close, and you've seen the nexus of, what happens at the UN. I mean, you know what goes on there, and how you are almost paralyzed in your action. So the other thing is that the Rohingyas came into Jammu, right? I mean, who, suddenly one day you realize and you wake up to the reality कि अरे यार 4 मस्जिदों से इतनी सारी कैसे हो गई, ये हम लोग सारी तरफ से घिर कैसे गए, ये आए कहाँ से, ये रास्ते में कहीं और नहीं जमे, ये आके जम्मू में कैसे बस गए. You start asking these questions when suddenly you realize. And I don't think, I mean, the nature of human beings is such that there will always be those differences. Let's not focus on those. I've always maintained that let's look at us as a unit together. हम सब में काफी सारी strengths हैं. We have many, strengths between us. We have a lot between us that we can pull in and, fight this battle together. You took names of Ankur, and certain other people who have been campaigning really, really hard. And I actually commend every single activist on the ground, every single person fighting on the borders, every single family who's suffering on the borders currently, dealing with all the families across India who have given their sons and daughters to fight for the country's, honor. I think there is the whole country united in this fight against jihad. And yes, finally, it is a religious disorder. It is a religious jihad that we are fighting against, sir. If you think otherwise, then I think I very politely and very humbly or sadly mistaken. There have been political volleyballs that have been played on our identity and on our plight. But it certainly is a war against jihad. It isn't anything else. And it is time that we call out. The final thing I want to say is that what can we do? There is a genocide, crime punishment and atrocities prevention bill that the Panun Kashmir team have drafted and have presented to the government of India. I would urge every single one of our citizens and overseas citizens as well to get their support behind it. Please lobby hard and get your local political representative to put it through in the parliament. क्योंकि ये खाली पंडित्स की बात नहीं है. What is happening in Bengal, and so you very rightly, and Harbans earlier, highlighted the historical volleyball that has been played, what all has been the sequence of events that have happened. let's not let it repeat anymore. हमारे पास और 1000 साल नहीं है to survive this. We've survived it thus far, and that's great. But then we have to nip it in the bud right now. We have to do something about it. India is committed to the international fraternity. It was a early proposer of the genocide and crime punishment law. How has it not, implemented it in its own land? And we are a democratic, law-abiding country. And our lawmakers really, when I talked about lawmakers and their role, I was particularly referring to the inclusion and the availability of a genocide crime punishment law in the country. And I've written extensively about it, sir. I'll not take any more time, but it's good to hear your passion and that kind of energy, sir.
That guy who said Pandits could not protect themselves. I deplore him. I'm again saying it is the duty of the administration to protect the citizens.
Absolutely.
So there is no doubt about that. There is a thing, and I've been trying to research. Even Mr. Sambyal is here. We had a discussion on this. I said, do we have any case where we know why this is being done, why it was done, what was the underlying things, what was the motivation? That is one. Secondly, Rohingya. I mean, they started from Myanmar, they crossed over to Bangladesh. Okay, they could be in West Bengal, they could be in Jharkhand, they could
How
be in
did
Bihar.
they come to Jammu? उठा के लेकर आए क्या यहाँ पर?
The story doesn't end here. The story doesn't end here. When Jammu people are always debating कि Rohingya कहाँ से आ गए, one of my cousins who happened to be chief executive officer. So one day he called me over for dinner and didn't turn up in time. I said, where were you? He said, chief minister had called me, Mehbooba. I said, for what? That she asked me for a report. Go and check those bastis of Rohingyas and give her the first-hand information. कि उनके पास पानी है, बिजली है, सीवरेज है.
राशन कार्ड है सर, आपके मेरे पास तो नहीं है, स्टेट सब्जेक्ट, उनके पास फटाफट आ गया है. क्या?
उनकी परवाह चीफ मिनिस्टर को है, and she's holding a KS officer right next to her at this hour. Why? In fact, she should be coming and asking them how to evict them out. They're non-state subjects, they're illegal migrants, and they are hazard to the country, law and order, the situation, and otherwise also the beautification rate is going for a 6. So that should have happened. Now, Dr. Ajay Charangu is a great friend of mine. We keep discussing a lot of stuff. In fact, we talked about you yesterday also, and obviously we'll carry on with our thing. And this the bill that you have drafted for the parliament, let's see what we can do about it.
Absolutely, sir. We have to be united in this fight. We are united in this fight. Absolutely.
No choice. We have no choice.
Absolutely, sir.
I started realizing that by and by there is a section of intellectuals who are with me on my International Institute of J&K Studies and Analysis. They're talking about it.
Absolutely.
And we're also trying to get connected with people from Gilgit-Baltistan as well. And let's see how we come. I mean, just even Gilgit-Baltistan Muslims, the Kashmiris call them Jammu Muslims. They don't want to sort of even identify themselves with them. They are also outsiders for them. So they are the same Muslims, even Sunni Muslims. But yet they say they are Jammu Walas, they are not Kashmiri. So this kind of a mindset has to go. And government of India has to awaken one day and realize and take some concrete action. And we have to sort of facilitate that process.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely.
I would like to jump in here because we're almost gone hour and a half now. So I will ask Harbans sir for his comments because he's been trying to gain attention. So Harbans sir, please.
Thank you, Vikrant. I wanted to make just a small point regarding terror. I have written about that in my forthcoming book, and have also wondered how the Kashmiris faced it and why did they face it like that. But then I remembered what happened in Punjab. Punjab is different from Kashmiri Pandits. Punjabi Sikhs, particularly, they are martial. And I know it firsthand in many villages. I have been living in this area since 1970. I have relatives in Punjab, friends in Punjab. I think most of the Punjab region, I have some very close friend or a relative there. I know that when somebody was killed on the suspicion of being a terrorist by the police, the family would not claim the dead body of the deceased. That is called terror. This happened in Srinagar also. Often I am forgetting the name of the Kashmiri Pandit who was killed and the family refused to cremate the body. It was cremated by the administration. That is called terror. I have also lectured a number of times that how terror should have been faced, but that is an ideal situation. In real life, we don't behave like that. Everybody is terrorized in the face of a superior power. Those who migrated in 1947, they came here victims of terror. Don't listen to anybody. Just look at the photographs, look at the faces of those people of 1947. And you know, terror is written in capital letters on their faces. Last year, I came across a book, 1971, written by a young lady from Pakistan, Anam Zakaria. She is working on trying to build bridges between India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And she had to face hostility when she visited Bangladesh. And she worked on the creation of Bangladesh and the violence that racked Bangladesh during the year 1970. It took them decades. They were living in denial. The government, which was responsible for the killings of Mujibur Rahman, for decades they did not allow any conversation to take place. But finally, during the last 10 years, when this conversation began and facts started coming out, I now realize that what actually happened. And I feel a renewed strength in humanity when I read that those victims of rape who survived that period, they are given the title of Veeranganas. They are honored in the society, which doesn't happen in our country. This is the unfortunate part. And what do I say about the Kashmiri Pandits? I do not know what is going to happen. I look at it from the point of view of history, and I realize that sometimes certain forces of history, they propel us towards a particular end. The unfortunate part of Kashmir history has been that Pandits have always migrated, sometimes in the form of isolated migrations, at other times greater waves, and a number of times exodus has taken place. Genocide has taken place a number of times. They stuck on for centuries, and I wonder why did they stick to the hope? What used to happen? Nobody wants to leave the homeland. But what used to happen was that in between the clouds, for very brief periods, there would be sunshine. And then basking in that sunshine, they would cling to hope and continue to live, making greater concessions to the Muslim brothers, developing bonds in a new way. But this has been there. So how does it end? I look at it from this point of view that 30 years is too short a period to heal the wounds caused by the trauma of not only the exodus, but of death also, not only of the loss, but of life also. 30 years is too small a period. But I also look at it from this angle that 30 years is long enough period for a new generation to grow. And that generation has to find avenues for itself. So what do we give to that generation? How do we make them realize that life moves on? There is no going back. That is a matter of fact. We cannot go back. Nobody can go back. Nobody has ever gone back. The Pakistani refugees in 1947, they came here in the belief that very soon this madness would be over and we'll go back to our homes and reclaim our property. They couldn't go back. In 1971-70, Bangladesh also believed that this madness would pass, but it doesn't happen. Between 69 and 1971, more than 2 million residents of East Pakistan, they migrated to India and they have never gone back. So while remembering history, while remembering what happened, we have to also formulate a policy for a philosophy for our life. How we do that? Is it amenable, or do we live in the hope of vendetta? Or do we give a positive direction to the next generation? For me, the next generation is much more important than us. We have a responsibility to give them a life, not only of hope, but of an ideal, and ideals rather, so that they emerge as better human beings. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Could
very
I
much,
just,
sir.
sorry, Vikrant, could I just
Yeah.
quickly respond? Sir,
Over to you, Vikrant. Thank you.
there are two very, very recent examples that come to mind. So if you remember, there was a protest and an attack on the Indian High Commission in London recently that was much talked about. And it was not the first time that something like that had happened. Our flag has been burnt and desecrated in this very country. And I was caught in that protest amongst, the few people that were there. And there were a couple of other Kashmiri Pandit families. And in that chaos, and we were trying to protect ourselves and save ourselves, this friend of mine, she's much elder to me, and her daughter and her son were there in the protest. They had come there for celebrations. They were there for the celebration of the Independence Day, performing, dancing, and singing. And these young children, because they're far away from India, that is our only way to connect with our own people sometimes, for the children to be part of these celebrations. We value them a lot. Us protest ke dauran, when we were surrounded on all sides and there were weapons and frozen bottles thrown at us, and we were attacked from all of the sides, this lady suddenly in panic clutched at me and she said, "Ab kya yahan se bhi hame nikal denge? Kashmir se to nikal diya." I didn't think that my child, my daughter will have to, see this day that I have suffered. I really hope, she doesn't, I didn't think that she would ever be in that situation of a boklake, she was quickly saying these things. But, you know, that's the thing with such trauma. One forgets that this is trauma of generation. There is a transgenerational trauma that we have gone through over, you know, centuries. We have suffered, and over a period of time, with, you know, a 30-year time is a long time. It's long enough, as you said, for a generation to grow up. There were many of my, you know, friends who were young children then and teenagers, and who have now become parents themselves, or, you know, some are even grandparents, right? And with them, this pain will either live or it will die. Our only connect to our identity, unfortunately, yes, of course, you know, all the efforts in the positive direction to keep that going, and we do that actively and to the best of our abilities. But that pain retains that connect to our exile consciousness. And we would like to keep that alive, because it's very, very important for the exile consciousness to remain, for our children and their children to know that, you know, this is where we have come. Unfortunately, people are so scared of talking about it that वो अपने बच्चों से बात ही नहीं कर पाते, वो अपने आपस में मियाँ बीवी बात नहीं कर पाते हैं about, you know, what they had gone through. It is so hard, so hard. I mean, in the last few years, there have been 2 publications we brought out with first-person accounts of victims of genocide who live in the UK. The first one, I remember, I had to spend hours and hours and hours trying to get people to talk about what happened to them, what was their, you know, memory, what had gone through in their lives, and what did they, you know, persevere. Bullets have been fired, crossing, just, you know, narrowly escaping them. They have had to go through a lot of insult and humiliation. They have almost been raped. Many have actually been raped. तो ये बहुत बहुत मुश्किल चीज होती है to, you know, to forget. And one must not forget these things, because it is very important. They're very important connectors to your own identity and to your own struggle. We are on war, sir. Our ladai mein, you can't be happy and you can't be positive, unfortunately. We try to retain our optimism. Of course we do that. That's what we do. But then there is got to be the pain remains pain. And I always like to say, I have many people know here that I lost my daughter a few years back. And I've always said that pain se hi to janm hota hai. Life is born out of pain. A mother perseveres a lot of pain, and out of that emerges life. And we must not forget that. And after war comes peace. Without war, there is no peace. And, you know, Brigadier sir is right here. He will verify that. And I would like to call out to each one, please do not be afraid. I'm told by many friends that, you know, it's too gory, it's a lot of blood and gore, and it's too ugly to tell our children. Arey bhai, your children are taught about world wars. They are taught about the Jewish Holocaust. The Black History Month is observed in the UK, and a lot of heinous crimes are discussed. Increasingly, they see bloodshed. Even their video games are full of bloodshed. So why are you afraid of talking to them about their own personal history? And finally, when I didn't know about the KP Exodus, being a Kashmiri myself, because I was that child who was protected from this information by my family. You know, perhaps they thought it was the best thing to do to not bring her up in that sort of negative mindset, and we should look forward and look ahead and all of that. But guess what? At the age of 27, when I actually suddenly realized what had happened, imagine what happened to me. I was angry. I was livid. I did not speak to my parents for a few years. I said, how dare you hide my own personal history from me? And I use that example with a lot of families, with a lot of mothers. Please do not be afraid. Do not hide your children's personal history from them. It's so important for them. It's not about you anymore. They are a living being in this world, and they need to know what happened to their ancestors and what has happened to them. Because कल को बड़े होंगे, उनको कल को कैसे तैसे पता चलेगा. हर किसी को गुस्सा नहीं आएगा. You know, they will think, chalo theek hai, it doesn't matter. I don't live there. It doesn't matter. It's down to the responsibility that we shoulder as individuals, as grown-ups, towards our younger lot, that yes, there is the genteel nurturing and caring that comes with parenting, and that comes with that, you know, elder role that you play. But युद्ध के लिए भी तो तैयार करना ही है ना. They are in war. Remember that we are in war. We are fighting the pandemic right now, but we are also fighting a much bigger war here, which is against jihad, which is against this radicalization. Hamare hi bacche kal ko suicide bombers ban jayenge. Would you like to live and see that day? No, certainly not. In the Britain, in the British population, they're having the jihadi Johns. Where have they come from? They were not born with that ideology. Of course not, but they were radicalized over a period of time. You see, a lot of criticism of the academics who are using liberalism and principles of libertarian principles to actually cause a lot of excesses and, use certain values to actually cause a lot of aggression. But ye kahin aur ke bacche, ye to hamare hi bacche hain na. They are being radicalized actively. There is a mafia out there who's dedicatedly doing this. Sir, Harbans sir, within your, fraternity, academia, you see this a lot. Fauj mein thoda bahut fir bhi kam hota hai because there is the discipline and the nationalistic, rigor and patriotism that sort of overrides any sentiment. But within the academic circles, we see it a lot. A lot of young people are getting, radicalized. I think there is no other word for it. And that is part of the genocidal process. Remember, we are going through a genocidal process actively right now until something is done, as we've all agreed, I think, so far, that something needs to be done, a little bit more needs to be done on each of our part. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmi ji. I think we've discussed really important and eye-opening points today that, yes, this is a war which we're fighting. Yes, we have to be aware. Yes, we have to wake up. And most importantly, the objective today was to appreciate and understand the difficult times the Kashmiri Pandit community has gone through, especially 31 years ago. During this time, we can't even imagine. Right now, we're sitting in our comfortable homes and having this discussion. But exactly 31 years ago, I'm sure the times were really, really difficult, which we all have to acknowledge and perhaps learn from it. The biggest problem, which I think in my time I'm understanding or I'm learning about, is that perhaps we repeat that same history. Somebody, I don't know who said this, but something I've learned from my father is those who do not learn from the history tend to repeat those mistakes. I think perhaps this is exactly what everybody is shouting about, and we have to make sure as a united force we tell our people, our community, our region that it's time to wake up and be prepared and perhaps start reversing what is going to happen in future. It is more about being aware. I would now like to conclude because I think we've gone almost into our second hour of conversation. So before it becomes monotonous and people start getting bored, I would like to conclude it. And once again, though I am in no position to say this, but I'm kind of very much willing to say that I would, like I'm saying, the times which Kashmiri Pandits have gone through were tough, no doubt about it. I don't know if there's anybody who can fix it or who would at least say, yes, this was wrong. At least I would like to say, yes, whatever happened was absolutely wrong. But at the same time, I would also like to thank our fellow Jammu people, Dogras, who were there to perhaps not do much, but to support whosoever came to Jammu. We managed to support, and perhaps we are the living example of the unity that right now Kashmiri Pandits, local Jammu Dogras, and even others, even Kashmiri Muslims are living in Jammu, and we are all living happily. There's no problem as such, and perhaps this is what the real harmony is, and we have to learn out of it, and perhaps we have to be more united and be prepared for future, open our eyes and accept what is going on. That's all I would like to say. Thank you very much, Lakshmi ji, Harbans sir, Brigadier Vijay Sagar sir. Thank you so much for taking out your time, and most importantly, Sushil sir, he's not here, but I'll send a thank you note to him afterwards for taking out your very valuable time today, especially on a Sunday, and giving us that time with all your experience and knowledge. I'm sure many would get motivated and inspired, and perhaps will be in looking towards a better future. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikrant. It's a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.